Patrick, I hate self-righteous people.
You sound pretty self-righteous about those self-righteous people.
I hate it when I'm self-righteous. And a lot of people who are outside the church look at Christians and say they don't want to become Christians because Christians are self-righteous. So does Jesus make us self-righteous?
My favorite self-righteous character on TV is Angela from The Office. She's just quintessential. She's always strung up. She's got long hair that's pulled back. She's judgmental to people. She's always frowning. And she's always wearing turtlenecks because apparently the Gap is too flashy. She calls the secretary the office mattress. And perhaps my favorite line is when she confesses to a group that she's been exposed to Harry Potter.
Oh, Patrick, I don't watch near as much TV as you do, and I've never seen The Office, but I am familiar with Ned Flanders, the Christian neighbor on The Simpsons, who seems like a pretty good guy, but he's always carrying his Bible around, which gives you the feel that maybe he's got a little self-righteousness in him.
Yeah, how dare he carry
his Bible around? What kind of Christian is he?
Oh man, that's crazy. No, look, here's the thing. It's a caricature. Hollywood Christians are kind of an exaggeration of real life Christians, and real life Christians can be a little bit self-righteous.
Yeah, I have a friend who is a pastor of a church, and the church is really trying hard to be more racially diverse in their congregation and their leadership. And he was telling me a story about how a fraternity guy came to talk to him because the college guy had concerns about the church. And it turns out that the college guy's concerns about the church is that it wasn't racially diverse enough. Now, my friend, the pastor, he knew this guy was in a fraternity, and so he asked him, he said, "Hey, how's your fraternity doing on racial diversity issues?" And the college guy was like, "Oh, we're doing pretty great." And he goes, "Really? Well, how many African Americans are in your house?" He goes, "Well, none." So at that point, I think it finally hit the college guy that he was criticizing the church for not being racially diverse enough. But he's a part of an organization that's not racially diverse at all, and evidently is okay with it. See, that's self-righteousness, having standards for others that you don't have for yourself.
Okay, here's my hot take. It's not just Christians who are self-righteous, it's pretty much everybody. I haven't seen this poll, but I'm pretty sure that if you did a poll and you asked people, hey, are you better than 50% of the population morally? My guess is that 95% of people would say, yes, absolutely, I think I am.
Yeah, the truth is that there's something about self-righteousness that makes us feel better about ourselves. We get to feel superior. We get to look down on other people. And you see it all the time on Twitter. I mean, Twitter could be called the self-righteous echo chamber, where everybody kind of virtue signals about what they are good at and how holy and good and righteous and just they are, and then criticizes everyone else for not being as good as them.
Yeah, I think the new form of self-righteousness is called outrage often. It looks like kind of being the politically correct police who go back in time and find something awful that someone said 15 years ago and bring it back into the present, even though that person probably believed the exact same thing 15 years ago.
Yeah, so it turns out that Jesus doesn't have to make us self-righteous. We already are.
If anybody had grounds to be self-righteous, it had to be Jesus. He didn't do anything wrong. He used his words wisely. He treated people well. He didn't take advantage of women. I mean, on every possible count, Jesus was a great guy who probably could have felt morally superior to a lot of people.
That's right. If self-righteous people are people who feel superior to others, well, Jesus had every reason to be so. In other words, he really was superior, so it would not have been wrong at all for him to look down on people. But he didn't do it.
No, he didn't. In fact, when we look at how Jesus treated people who treated him poorly, he does the opposite. Think about the crowds who are cheering, "Crucify him, crucify him." Well, Jesus, when he saw those crowds, knowing that that's what was going to happen, the Bible says that he felt compassion on them and that he fed them.
Yeah, think about Judas, who's going to betray him, a friend, close friend, who turns his back on Jesus in his greatest time of need. But what does Jesus do to Judas? He washes his feet right before Judas goes out and sells his friend to the authorities.
Another kind of similar example is Peter. I mean, Peter denies Jesus publicly 3 different times, but the Gospels go out of their way to highlight the fact that after Jesus was resurrected, he finds Peter and he doesn't, browbeat him and say, "What a terrible guy you are. How could you have ever done this?" Instead, Jesus goes out of his way to love him and to actually restore him and forgive him.
Yeah, in Philippians 2, it says that Jesus does not hold on to power. He doesn't hold on to his rights or his ability to feel superior, but instead he relinquishes it all to give his life for people like you and me, for sinners like us.
When I think about this personally, it kind of makes me realize that his humility and his forgiveness towards me whenever I mess up, that's the very thing I need to free me from self-righteousness. Because if I know that he's going to be humble, if I know that he's going to be forgiving, I don't have to fake it with him. I can be really honest about who I am.
Yeah, Jesus gives us all the power to stop faking, to stop pretending, to be honest about who we are, our strengths and our weaknesses, the good and the bad, all of it.
Self-righteousness is a masquerade. You know, masquerade's one of those fancy parties where everybody puts a little mask on their face and they don't look the same. And that's what self-righteousness is. It's covering up the real you. It's faking who you are so that you look better than you are. Now, I've never been invited to a masquerade, but if you've got one, please include me in on it. I'd like to be a part of one day.
You've never been to a costume party, a Halloween costume party?
Different thing, you know, masquerade's like a ball, and I realize you grew up in Jeff City. It's a little smaller town, hard to imagine the nicer things.
A costume party where you wear a mask is pretty similar to what you were saying. I guess being private school and speaking in Latin is somewhat antisocial.
Yes, at my private school, we always went to the masquerade.
You smoked a pipe. Anyway, so Jesus tells a parable about a Pharisee that was very respected in the community and a tax collector that was despised. And in the story that Jesus tells, the Pharisee starts praying, God, I thank you that I've kept all these religious rules.
Is that your prayer voice?
Yeah, it is my prayer voice. I'm trying to be devout.
Sorry,
no. So Patrick, he breaks the rules in our offices, like the don't fart rule. I broke it the other day. Anyway,
I'm not the only offender on that one.
Then the Pharisee looks at the tax collector and says, God, I thank you that I'm not like that tax collector. Meanwhile, the tax collector is over on his knees. He won't even look up to heaven. He's beating his chest, saying, God, have mercy upon me, for I am a sinner. So the Pharisee, he's faking it. He's pretending to be more religious and more righteous and more holy and more obedient than he really is. Whereas the tax collector, he's not faking it. He's just down on his knees before God, being honest about all of his sin.
So the Pharisee is a master of the masquerade. And that's really at the heart of what Jesus critiqued the Pharisees for in the first century. It wasn't that they had the wrong system of religion. It was something entirely different than that.
Whoa, wait a second. I feel a private school Patrick moment upon us. Private school Patrick is now ready to lay down some historical knowledge on us public school kids. Go, Patrick.
All right, so Pharisees. Again, a lot of people think, oh, here's the problem with the Pharisees. They thought that you could do good works to get into heaven. And that's not really what any Pharisees believed at all. It's also not why Jesus critiqued the Pharisees. The thing that he critiqued the Pharisees for over and over and over again was their hypocrisy. It was what we've been talking about. They were putting on a religious mask, and they thought that by putting on that religious mask, they were going to bring God's kingdom on earth. But Jesus looks at them and he says, God doesn't just care about your external parts. He doesn't care about your law abiding. He cares far more about what's on the inside, which is why he called the Pharisees whitewashed tombs, where he said, hey, you're like cups that are clean on the outside, but filthy on the inside.
So what exactly is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy is not just saying one thing and doing another. If that's hypocrisy, then we're all hypocrites all the time. Hypocrisy is more about faking, pretending to be something that you're not.
And again, this goes back to what Jesus said about the Pharisees. He said, look, you're great at looking awesome on the outside to people, but on the inside, something is broken, something is terribly wrong. And so the opposite of being hypocritical is taking off the mask and instead showing who you really are. Another good example from Jesus is that he warns his disciples. He says, look, hypocrisy, self-righteousness, he calls it the leaven of the Pharisees. And I don't know much about baking, but leaven is yeast. And when you put yeast inside of a dough ball, apparently it grows, it spreads until it fills the whole thing. And I think that's his warning. When you start giving in to hypocrisy and self-righteousness, it just spreads throughout the rest of your life.
Yeah, hypocrisy comes in a lot of forms. One form is when we have standards for other people that we don't hold ourselves to. When we expect from others what we don't expect from us. And hypocrisy is like yeast. It spreads. It doesn't just spread in our life, but it spreads to other people. There's something about hypocrisy and self-righteousness that is so appealing to us that once it starts in a school or in a family or on a team or in an office, it just spreads like wildfire. That we all start looking down on each other. We all start holding other people to standards we don't hold ourselves. We start pretending. Now, how do you fight back against hypocrisy?
Think about most religions. What does it take to kind of get in? Well, I think normally it's being a good person, right?
Yeah, you try to be a good person and earn your way to God. God accepts you based on how good you are. I had a friend the other day who told me that that's exactly what he believes. He thought that God is going to look at his life, and if he's good enough, he's going to make it in. Now, he was really confident that he was going to get in with God, and I looked at him and said, "You must be hoping that God grades on a curve." And he started laughing because he's not.
I'm glad he laughed and didn't get offended at that point.
Well, you know me at this point. He just knew who I was and went with it. But I said to him, "You're being very exclusive." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I'm not very good. So I don't get to go to the good people heaven where you are. Just like I don't get to go to private school heaven where Patrick is."
And this is actually how Jesus can set us free from self-righteousness and hypocrisy, because the cost of entry to his kingdom is actually admitting the fact that you're a sinner, that you have problems in your life. To get into his kingdom, you don't put on the mask, you actually take it off, and you're not fake, you're real, you show who you really are.
Yeah, but that means that you have to admit that you're a sinner. Jesus said that he has come not to call the healthy, but the sick. Not to call the righteous, but the sinners. Now, Jesus doesn't mean that some people are healthy and righteous and don't need a doctor. What he means is that some people think they are. They pretend to be that. It's like if I come along and say, "I've got the cure for cancer." The only way for that to benefit you is if you admit that you've got cancer. Now, nobody's ashamed to admit that they have cancer, but a lot of us are ashamed to admit that we are sinners, that we're really broken, we can't rescue ourselves, and that we need Jesus. And as long as we're ashamed to admit the truth, we're keeping ourselves from the cure.
I think part of the reason why it's so hard to admit this, by the way, is precisely because we live in a culture that loves self-righteousness. To admit in public that I have a problem is to admit that I am part of the problem. And that means I might get excluded. People might not want to have anything to do with me. But I try to think about it the opposite way. There's nothing that, it might push me away from other people, but there's nothing that's going to draw me closer to Jesus than admitting my need. And there's nothing that's going to push me farther away from Jesus than putting on a mask. So Jesus called the Pharisees hypocrites, but Jesus' followers called him the Christ. What's that all about?
What does Christ mean? We'll hit that on the next episode.
No, I'm saying I like it when we're interacting.
I like it when we freelance. Don't freelance. Okay, I don't like it when you freelance.
All
I
right,
like it
here
when
we
I
go.
freelance.
I know I like it when you freelance. I just like it when we're arguing or when we have a little conversation.
That was good.